Let's have an honest conversation about your portfolio, because I think you're cheating on XLM, and I think you know it. Okay? So before anybody gets defensive, let me explain what I actually mean by that. Because this isn't really about XLM specifically, it's about a pattern. And I think a lot of people watching this are going to recognize themselves in it, whether they hold XLM, XRP, HBAR, or honestly any combination of the three. Here's the pattern. You buy XLM, you actually do some real research, you read about the DTCC integration, you read about Visa adding Stellar to its settlement platform, you read about PayPal's PYUSD launching on it. You feel good. You feel like you found something solid. And then a week later, XRP pumps 4% in an afternoon on some ETF inflow headline, and suddenly you're checking XRP's price every 20 minutes, wondering if you should have put more there instead. Then the week after that, somebody posts a thread about HBAR's enterprise partnerships and its staking yield. And now you're wondering if you made a mistake not loading up on HBAR instead. You're not actually committed to any of these. You're Roth hopping. And I want to be really direct with you that hopping is probably costing you more than any single bad coin pick ever could. This is the tough love part. So let me just say it plainly. The problem was never which coin you picked. The problem is you've never actually finished falling in love with any of them. You keep getting distracted by whoever posted the most exciting headline this week. And that pattern, repeated over months and years, is genuinely more destructive to your outcome than just picking one of these three and being wrong about it would be. Let me show you why with the actual data. Because I don't want this to just be a metaphor. I want you to see the real cost. Back in March this year, XRP dropped to around $1.37, down 62% from its all-time high. 60% of XRP's circulating supply was sitting at a loss. If you are an XLM holder who jumped ship into XRP right around its peak last July, chasing the excitement of that $3.65 all-time high, you'd have written that entire 62% drawdown. And you'd have done it specifically because you abandoned a position you'd actually researched for one you got excited about during a moment of maximum hype. Now, flip it around. Back in May this year, when PayPal's PYUSD and Visa's stablecoin settlement platform both landed on Stellar within weeks of each other, XLM saw real, documented price reaction, genuine institutional validation showing up in real time. If you were an XRP or HBAR holder who'd already mentally checked out of XLM months earlier because it felt boring compared to XRP's price action, you missed that entire window. Not because you made a bad initial decision, but because you'd already emotionally moved on before the thing you originally believed in actually started paying off. This is the actual cost of cheating. It's not that you picked wrong, it's that you leave right before the relationship was about to get good, and you arrive at the next one right before it gets hard, over and over. That's not a coin problem. That's a you problem. And I say that with real care, because I think almost everybody in this space, myself included at different points, has done some version of this. So let's actually talk about why this happens, because I don't think people do this randomly. I think there's a real psychological mechanism driving it, and understanding the mechanism is the only way to actually stop doing it. Part of it is what's called the grass is greener effect, and it's not unique to crypto. It shows up in actual relationships too, which is honestly why this metaphor works as well as it does. When you're holding an asset that's going through a quiet, boring stretch, every other asset's exciting moment looks more appealing than your own asset's potential future, because you're comparing your current reality against someone else's highlight reel. You're not comparing XLM's actual 5-year institutional adoption thesis against XRP's actual 5-year cross-border payment thesis. You're comparing XLM sitting flat at 20 cents against a screenshot of XRP's best day this month. That's not a fair comparison. It never was and it never will be, no matter which 3 coins you're rotating between. There's also a specific behavioral finance term for the broader pattern here. It's sometimes called recency bias, stacked on top of fear of missing out. And the two together are genuinely a brutal combination. Recency bias makes your brain weight the most recent price action far more heavily than it deserves. So if XRP pumped yesterday, your brain treats that as more meaningful information than the entire multi-year thesis you have researched 6 months ago, and FOMO takes that recency-weighted information and turns it into urgency, into the feeling that you need to act right now or you'll miss something, when in reality, multi-year institutional theses don't actually have a right now window that closes overnight. DTCC's stellar integration isn't going to suddenly become unavailable to you because you waited an extra week to decide whether to rotate your position. The urgency is manufactured by your own nervous system reacting to a chart, not by anything actually happening in the underlying thesis. Part of it is also just genuine, understandable impatience. The institutional case behind any of these 3 coins, the ISO 20022 thesis, the DTCC integration, Ripple's Cayman corridors, Hedera's enterprise partnerships, all of it operates on a timeline measured in years, not weeks. DTCC's stellar integration is targeting the first half of 2027, not tomorrow. Waiting on a multi-year institutional thesis while watching 3 different coins do 3 different exciting things on 3 different days is genuinely hard emotionally, and I don't want to pretend it isn't. Now, let's actually run the math on what this hopping costs you, because I think seeing real numbers makes the abstract point land harder. So say you start with $30,000, and instead of committing to 1 coin, you rotate, chasing whichever of the 3 is having its moment. You put it all in XLM in January. Then XRP pumps in February. So you sell and rotate, paying whatever the exchange's trading fee happens to be. Let's say a conservative 0.5% round trip. That's $150 gone immediately just on the swap. Then HBAR has its moment in March. You rotate again, another $150 gone. By the time you've made even 4 or 5 of these rotations over a year, which honestly isn't an aggressive pace for someone genuinely chasing headlines, you've burned somewhere between $600 and $1,000, so purely in trading friction, completely independent of whether any individual rotation was even a good call. But the trading fees are actually the smaller cost. The bigger cost is timing. Every single time you rotate, you're statistically more likely to be buying into whatever just pumped, meaning you're buying near a local top, and selling whatever's been quiet, meaning you're selling near a local bottom. The exact opposite of what you'd want to be doing. That's not a guess. That's just the documented, repeated behavioral pattern of chasing headlines across basically every asset class that's ever existed. You're not timing the market when you do this. The market is timing you. Okay, so tough love means I also have to be honest about the other side of this, because there's a difference between cheating out of impatience and FOMO, and genuinely, thoughtfully deciding your original thesis was wrong. I don't want this video to turn into never sell anything, loyalty above all else, because that's not responsible advice either. That's just trading one kind of mistake for another. Here's how you actually tell the difference, and I think this is the most useful part of this entire video. If you're considering moving away from XLM or XRP or HBAR, ask yourself this question honestly. Did something about the underlying thesis actually change, or did something about the price change if DTCC's stellar integration got canceled or significantly delayed beyond its stated window? That would be a real legitimate reason to reconsider your XLM position, because the thing you actually believed in stopped being true. If XRP's legal situation somehow got worse instead of better, that would be a real reason to reconsider XRP. If HBAR's enterprise partnership started unwinding, that would be a real reason to reconsider HBAR. But XRP went up 4%, and XLM didn't, is not a thesis level event. It's noise. It's one Tuesday. And making a real permanent decision based on one Tuesday's noise is exactly the pattern this entire video is trying to get you to recognize in yourself. I also want to be honest, though, that loyalty for loyalty's sake isn't actually a virtue here. If you genuinely sat down, did the real comparison, weighed XLM's institutional partnership momentum against XRP's deeper market and transparent escrow structure against HBR's native staking yield and flatter concentration structure, and concluded that a different allocation actually fits your goals better. That's not cheating. That's called doing your homework. The problem was never changing your mind. The problem is changing your mind every single week based on whichever headline hit your feed most recently, without ever actually sitting down and doing that comparison properly, even once. So let's actually do a version of that real comparison right now properly. The kind of comparison you should be doing before you decide whether to stay or whether to genuinely, thoughtfully move on, instead of doing it reactively in the middle of a price swing. XLM's case rests heavily on a genuinely unusual run of institutional partnerships. Real verifiable names like PayPal, Visa, DTCC, Franklin Templeton, all choosing Stellar's infrastructure within roughly the same year. PayPal's PYUSD stablecoin went live on Stellar back in September with 5-second finality and built-in currency conversion anchors. Visa added Stellar to its stablecoin settlement platform back in July, alongside Ethereum, Solana, and Avalanche. DTCC, the clearinghouse behind nearly every U.S. stock and bond trade, is targeting a tokenized securities launch on Stellar in the first half of 2027. The risk sitting underneath that case is concentration. The top 10 wallets control something like 80% of circulating supply, with a single foundation wallet holding 41% on its own. And while that wallet's spending has historically aligned with ecosystem development rather than personal profit, it's still a structural risk worth tracking. XRP's case rests on the deepest, most established market of the three. A transparent, scheduled escrow structure you can actually verify the release schedule for. Years of real cross-border payment corridor usage across more than 65 countries, and a broad, growing whale cohort. Wallets whoring 1 million XRP or more now control roughly 74% of supply. That's been net accumulating over the past 6 months, even through a rough first quarter. The risk sitting underneath its case is that XRP doesn't pay you any native yield. Your entire return depends on price appreciation, and the network's own payment volume has shown real volatility, collapsing 90% from a February peak earlier this year, before partially recovering, alongside 60% of supply sitting at an unrealized loss at one point in March. HBAR's case rests on the only real native staking yield of the three, around 2% annually with no lockup, distributed roughly every 24 hours, a flatter concentration structure at the very top than either of the other two, with the single largest known whale wallet holding only around 6% of supply compared to XLM's 41%, and a growing enterprise and institutional partnership track record across banking, insurance, and logistics. The risk sitting underneath its case is the thinnest, least mature market of the three, with a futures to spot volume ratio that runs more leverage heavy proportionally than either XRP or XLM. Sometimes 4 to 10 times spot volume on a given day, meaning sharper percentage swings when sentiment shifts, and a less mature, less precisely documented rich list tracking culture overall compared to the other two. Notice what just happened there. None of those three paragraphs said, and therefore this one is obviously the best, because that's not actually the point. The point is, each of these three has a real articulable case and a real articulable risk, and you can only know which one actually fits what you specifically need. Your time horizon, your risk tolerance, your reason for being in this space at all, by sitting with that comparison honestly once, calmly, and then actually committing to the decision you make instead of relitigating it every single week based on whatever happens to be green that day. Here's the practical version of what stop cheating actually looks like in real concrete terms, not just as a metaphor. First, decide your actual allocation in writing today while you're calm. Maybe that's 100% in one of these three. Maybe it's a deliberate split across 2 or 3 of them, which is a genuinely reasonable strategy too, spreading exposure across a few different angles of the same broader ISO 20022 thesis. Whatever you land on, write it down with your actual reasoning attached, not just the percentages. Second, decide in advance what would actually constitute a thesis level reason to change that allocation versus what's just noise. Write that down too. I will reconsider my XLM position if the DTCC integration gets canceled or significantly delayed beyond its stated window. I will reconsider my XRP position if regulatory clarity meaningfully reverses. I will reconsider my HBAR position if its enterprise partnerships start unwinding. Specific, falsifiable conditions, not vague feelings. Third, give yourself an actual cooling off period before acting on any single day's price action. If XRP pumps and you feel the urge to rotate out of XLM, right that second, wait a week. If the urge is still there after a week, and you can articulate an actual thesis level reason, not just XRP went up, then fine, that's a real decision. But most of the time, that urge fades within a few days because it was never really about XRP's fundamentals. It was about watching a green candle on someone else's chart while yours was red. And fourth, and I think this one's honestly the hardest, stop measuring your decision's success by comparing it to whichever of the other two coins happened to pump hardest this particular week. That's not how you evaluate a multi-year thesis. You evaluate a multi-year thesis over years against the actual milestones you wrote down in your own plan, not against a constantly shifting comparison to whichever asset is currently having its best month. I think the deepest version of this tough love is actually this. The reason cheating feels so tempting in this space isn't really about the coins at all. It's that watching a static, sometimes flat position is uncomfortable. And jumping to whatever's exciting this week feels like a hit of activity that feels like progress, even when it's actually working against you. Real conviction, the kind that actually lets institutional feces like these play out over the years they actually need is built by sitting with the discomfort of not acting, not by constantly chasing the next thing that makes you feel like you're doing something. And I think it's worth naming, honestly, why that discomfort feels so much worse in crypto specifically than it does in, say, a traditional retirement account sitting in an index fund. Nobody's posting hourly updates about their 401k's performance on social media. Nobody's creating urgent sounding content every time the S&P moves 0.5%. But crypto's entire content ecosystem, this video included, honestly, runs on attention. And attention is generated by urgency, by reaction, by look what just happened. That environment actively trains you to treat every single price movement as information worth acting on. When the actual multi-year theses underneath these three coins genuinely don't care what happened in the last 24 hours. You're not just fighting your own psychology here. You're fighting an entire ecosystem that structurally incentivized to keep you reacting instead of sitting still, because reacting generates clicks and sitting still doesn't. That doesn't mean you should ignore real news entirely. Obviously, that would be its own kind of mistake. Willful ignorance dressed up as discipline. It means learning to sort incoming information into two buckets really fast, every single time. Bucket one, does this actually change the underlying thesis? A canceled partnership, a legal reversal, a fundamental shift in the network's actual usage. Bucket 2, is this just a price movement or a single day's headline that feels important because it's recent and loud? Most of what crosses your feed belongs to bucket 2, and training yourself to recognize that quickly, almost automatically, is genuinely the single highest leverage skill you can build if you actually want any of these multi-year theses to have a chance to play out for you. XLM, XRP, and HBAR are not actually competing against each other for your loyalty, the way this metaphor makes it sound. They're three different bets on overlapping but distinct pieces of the same broader institutional adoption story, each with its own real strengths and its own real risks. The actual enemy isn't any of these three coins. It's the version of you that can't sit still enough to find out whether the bet you already made was right, because you're too busy checking whether the bet you didn't make is doing better this particular Tuesday. So here's my actual ask, and it's not by XLM, it's not by XRP, it's not by HBAR, it's go decide properly, calmly, in writing what you actually believe and why. Set the conditions that would change your mind in advance, and then give whatever you decide the actual multi-year runway these institutional theses genuinely require. Instead of relitigating the decision every single week based on whoever's having their best day, if this hit a little too close to home, if you recognized your own portfolio behavior somewhere in this video, hit the like button. Not because I'm asking nicely, but because honestly, admitting the pattern is the first step to actually fixing it. And more people need to hear this exact conversation instead of more hype. So subscribe if you want more of this, the actual psychology and the actual math behind these decisions. Not just whichever coin happens to be pumping this week dressed up as analysis. Drop a comment and tell me honestly, which of these three have you actually cheated on in the way I just described? Jumping ship out of impatience rather than a real thesis change. And what did it actually cost you when you look back on it, honestly? And if you know somebody who's been rotating between XRP, XLM, and HBAR every few weeks, chasing whichever one just pumped, send them this video. They need the tough love more than they need another price prediction. Have a great day. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, And be sure to join my free Telegram community with the link on my channel where I post my daily crypto experience and arbitrage opportunities you can't get anywhere else. This is XRP Hobart signing off.